Hello, and welcome to Conversations in Science, hosted by the Buffalo Museum of Science. Tonight, our panelists will be addressing Latinx lead environmental justice, and we're focusing about issues right here in the city of Buffalo and in Western New York. My name is Gabrielle Graham. I'm the Community Partnerships and Adult Programs Manager for the museum. I'll be running the background for chat questions, and I would like to thank RP Oak Hill Building Company for their presenting sponsorship of the Conversations in Science series. With the support of our sponsors, donors, and our members, we're able to bring continued programming to audiences in Western New York and abroad. Now I will fade into the background and hand it over to Kelly Camacho. She's our public programs coordinator, and she has put together this fine panelists for this evening. And with that, take it away, Kelly.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I'm super excited to be here with these folks. I'm really excited to be the one doing their introduction because I am very passionate about our topic tonight, but I'm also very passionate about these folks. These are really well-known and upcoming leaders in the Buffalo community, and I'm absolutely so proud to know them and call them my friends. So I'm going to introduce our speakers for this evening. I'm going to start with Gio Hernandez. So Gio is a Dominican Afro-Latina from the Bronx who started organizing during college. She utilizes her degree in criminal justice and education, and she works to eradicate environmental racism and classism, and most recently as the lead coalition organizer with New York Renews and Working Families Party. Gio is working tirelessly to pass the Climate and Community Investment Act in New York State and is going to make sure that the implementation happens right here in Western New York. Next, I'm going to introduce Eric Maldonado. He is a local artist and contributor to the West Side Energy Roadmap, which discusses how national policies impact real communities. The study area is a combination of the 14213 and 14201 zip codes, taking into account various factors such as racial demographics, economics, education, and transportation. Next up, we have Angel Rosado, who is a Latino community activist and organizer from Buffalo, New York. Angel's life has been impacted by pollution, racial inequities, and educational inequities. Angel has a passion for housing justice and has worked to further the Buffalo Tenant Bill of Rights campaign. And last but certainly not least, people who are very familiar with Luz have definitely just been in Buffalo for any amount of time because Luz is everywhere. So Luz is a Latina elder that uses her experiences with environmental racism to help better the lives of the next generation. Luz graduated from Buffalo State College in 1985 with a Bachelor's of Science in Social Work and a minor in Afro-American History. She advocated on behalf of the Climate and Community Protection Act, giving her testimony in New York City, addressing the Assembly Standing Committee on Environmental Conservation before the bill passed in 2019. So virtually, let's give it up for our speakers that we have tonight. I'm very excited to be welcoming these folks on behalf of the Buffalo Museum of Science. I'm going to, for the sake of time, I would normally have folks introduce themselves a little more thoroughly, but I think we can cover some of that into just jumping into some of our questions for the night. So I'm going to proceed to our list of questions. So the first question I'm going to pose to our panelists is, what does environmental justice mean to you?
I'll jump in. This is Lucy. Environmental justice to me, and I think a lot of people, oops, hold on, let me get a picture of myself. How lovely. Okay, I got a face for radio. I think environmental justice for me is about equity. So many of us have not been a part of the process, have not been at the table when it comes to the inadequacies and the suffering that our community, people of color, all people, because we're all people of color, have dealt with regard to the problems related to pollution and how it has affected us in terms of the health disparities in all our communities. exacerbated by what's happened with the COVID epidemic, but also way before that. We have been suffering for so long with so many different medical issues that I think when we think about environmental justice, we need to look at the inequity and studying that in terms of who and what is causing our communities to be sick, who and what factors need to change in order for us to be better people and bring about a change that we all need in order for us to grow, develop, and make sure that the next 7 generations of our communities are taken care of. So I know there are other people, so I just wanted to keep it to a nutshell. Thank you.
All right, would any other panelists like to respond to that question?
Yeah, I can go. When I think about environmental justice, I think about the vision and the world that is possible, right? To equity. And I think about resources a lot. Equitable resource distribution across communities, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, all of these different things that have been used as social norms to divide us, no longer taking place so that we can actually live a life that is fruitful, that is a life able to thrive. And so when I think about environmental justice, I think of the flip and the opposite of what we're living in right now, which is environmental injustice, right? It's a lot of envisioning, it's a lot of practicing, but it's also a lot of pushing forth policy and practice so that we can actualize the world that we envision on a daily basis and really eradicate a lot of the harms that we're currently living through. And pushing us further and bolder to a world that we deserve and that specifically honors indigenous relationship with the earth and each other as people, as species. I think that that's what screams out to me when I think of environmental justice just off the bat.
All right, any other additions before we move to the next question? No? Okay. So this one kind of jumps off the back of that last question. Eric, I saw you come off mute, so I will let you respond. I will pose this question first. How does your identity relate to environmental justice? And so Eric, I will let you say what you're going to say first. I know that we have a little bit of a lag with the tech issues.
No, it's okay. I think everyone's just very aware of, being kind to everyone else and letting them speak first. So I can just kind of match these two together. Let me just bring the question back up. So second question was, how does your identity relate to environmental justice? Yeah, I can definitely match these two. When I think of environmental justice, I think of the environment, but also how we as a species, as a member of this planet, interact with the environment, not just how it affects us. It's kind of a feedback loop that continues, and how we have created society up until this point has really made that feedback loop something that is very harmful for certain folks. And you can tell based on where you live, like my identity, how I relate to environmental justice. As a Puerto Rican, I live in the West Side. My mom purchased her house that I live in 2006, and it's over 100 years old. It's a work in progress, but it's a good house. It's provided me home. One of the things that I have noticed over the course of my living here, on and off from 2006 and then now on from 2018 till now, is there's a lot of different things that I didn't notice growing up that are very prominent now. For example, if it rains even the slightest bit and the sewage system gets backed up, then there's this smell that's just kind of always present in the air. The air, there's air pollution. So my identity correlates with environmental justice because there is typically people like me, people of color, that live in this area that are exposed to these conditions. And it really just kind of hits home that where I live is affected differently by the way that we conduct business, by the way that we have built society. And so environmental justice for me means like recognizing where certain people are congregated, where certain folks live, and then taking a look at the conditions that they live in and realizing that 9 times out of 10, maybe even 10 times out of 10, it's not a coincidence that certain folks live with certain conditions while others have different.
Yeah. So just going on the same thing. Also being a Puerto Rican man, I grew up on the west side. I now live on the east side of Buffalo, but that's just because of having to move a lot for economic reasons and housing reasons. But yeah, like my family, I have asthma. My mother has asthma. My grandmother had asthma. And none of that is a coincidence. Like that people who live blocks away from the Peace Bridge, you know what I mean, with all the traffic, have breathing issues. Like that's not a coincidence at all. And even now, like the area I live in is a predominantly Black neighborhood, but like if you roll down Broadway, there's really no trees on Broadway. But like if you roll down Bidwell, like it's all green. And as we know, like the just greenery in your area, the greenery where you live impacts like the air quality you have. And so when you have neighborhoods that are predominantly ones of color, where it's like, yes, we have higher rates of asthma on the west side because being near the Peace Bridge, and then you have a predominantly neighborhood of color with the Broadway Fillmore where there's no trees, it's like it's a consistent battle for like air quality. And just tying it back to the first question, it's like environmental justice means like we do right by the environment without sacrificing people just based on like gender, race, or any type of like demographic. Like we can do right by the environment without having to like scapegoat people, without having to make people like of color or, you know, different gender identities fit the bill or suffer for it. And it is possible. It's just a matter of like the will to do so. And that's like really what it comes down to is are we willing to do what's necessary so that the planet continues, but also people of color are no longer like the sacrifice for that.
Thank you. And Luz, I can see your hand is up. Would you like to make the next comment?
Yes, very quickly. I can compare because I'm not originally from Buffalo. I'm from Long Island, New York, and I came in 1980. And because of that, I can make the comparison. And also, I'm very proud that I'm surrounded by young folks because I happen to be an elder. So I can look at it from that point of view and say that when it comes to illnesses, that doesn't have a color. So when we look at what's happened, especially in socioeconomically impacted communities, especially where we are living, the East and the West Side, we tend to have a higher rate of people that are being faced with a lot of different carcinogens, a larger area of people who are dealing with deaths related to health, related to heart and lung disease, non-fatal heart attacks, irregular heartbeats, aggravated asthma, because I know a lot of people are dealing with asthma, younger and older, decreased lung function, which was something that happened to me when Angel was talking about where you live makes a big difference too, because I did not have asthma or bronchitis or anything like that, but I ended up getting so many lung infections that I was giving a diagnosis to get my papers in order because they didn't believe that I was going to last any longer than 6 months to a year. So when you look at those kind of factors, you really got to look at saying, hey, a lot of things have played into where we live, whether it's social economics, whether it's heredity, but not so much the heredity. It's where you come from, where you lived. I live near the Peace Bridge, and because of that, I tend to have dealt with a lot of the emissions that go along with transportation issues. You know, when you have trucks and cars that are idling for long periods of times, and you live near those areas and you're sucking in those kinds of emissions, all these things factor into being sick, being frail, and, you know, and a lot of other factors, because we can always talk about, you know, living in a food desert and not having good healthy foods, and you know, living in a home that's not healthy. So there's so many factors, but I just wanted to bring that out. So thank you.
Thank you, Luz. I will say I have many identities, right? And so that directly relates to environmental justice, being a woman, being from an immigrant family, being from the South Bronx, being a young person, being inclined to health disparities, being obese. So many different identities that I hold negatively affect my life and quality of life when it comes to environmental justice. And so this multi-layering of identity, then comparing and relating to how we perceive our environment, which is everything around us, it's a direct correlation, right? I grew up literally right next to the family criminal and Supreme Court houses of the Bronx. And so policing was a part of my lifestyle, to the point where I thought that that was normal, and that that was the same in everybody's environment, and that that was fair and just. And that's absolutely not the case, right? And so we have to really take a look at people's identities, both oppressed identities and privileged identities, and see how they correlate with each other, and what is the short end of the stick or the long end of the stick that they're getting based on that specific identity. And for most folks of color and folks of Indigenous, Black backgrounds, that means that they're getting a lower end, lower quality of life. And that's realistically sane, both scientifically and in practice and in lived experience, sharing that, right? And so it often, at least for me, means that I won't be here as long. And you've heard that from Luz directly.
Thank you. I just want to really appreciate the vulnerability and realness that you guys are bringing to this conversation. And so far, we've talked about how kind of location and housing and identities are impacted by our environment. Could we talk about how environmental justice impacts transportation?
Yes. So as you mentioned earlier when you introduced me, I last year worked with Bush Buffalo to develop the West Side Community Energy Roadmap. It was a very big project that was aimed at identifying the different ways that we could transform not just the West Side as a community, but communities across the United States to be more geared towards sustainable green living. So one of the aspects we looked at was transportation. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that transportation does play a part in not just environmental justice, but also racial disparity. Just look at our very limited train system. It goes from downtown all the way up Main Street and stops at UB's South Campus. And that is by design. And that's for a very particular purpose. And that's to make sure that people from the inner city have a very limited access to the areas that surround the inner city. And then you look at the NFTA in general with bus routes as well. And there have been many, many bus routes that have been cut over just the last 10 years plus. We interviewed a man by the name of Justin Booth when we were developing this project specifically for transportation. He's a pedestrian advocacy. He's part of a pedestrian advocacy group called Go Bike. He was the director at the time. And one of the statistics he gave us was that though Buffalo only has a population of about 30% who own their own vehicle, the entire downtown, as well as the structure of the roads, caters to people who drive single occupancy vehicles, like just cars. Majority of them going downtown to work. And 33% of the total downtown space. Another figure he gave us was dedicated just to parking these vehicles. So when we talk about the air quality in neighborhoods or in the downtown area and also by the Peace Bridge, that's part of it. You have all of these vehicles that are coming in from so many different areas of the city. They congregate in one spot, and you know, you got gridlock, you got what did Lou say? Cars that are idling, you know, waiting for like a particular stop sign or stoplight, and all of that emissions goes into the air that people are breathing when they're living in areas like in close proximity. Not to mention when we talk about then how limited our transportation system is and our access to other areas. Like I just, for example, if I was to get a job over in the Galleria Mall, if I didn't have my own vehicle, how difficult would it be for me to get to the Galleria Mall? And not just difficult as in, can I get there? Because I know there is a bus that goes there, but how often does that bus run? At what intervals does it run? Then say compared to the 11 for Colvin or the 25 for Delaware. And these are all things that directly affect people in our neighborhoods, in the West Side, in the East Side, because we don't have, when we are looking for jobs, there aren't very many jobs in our neighborhood where we can like say walk or have an easier commute. A lot of the jobs tend to be, you know, in North Buffalo or Amherst, or, you know, just areas like Niagara Falls Boulevard that are much farther from where we live. So a normal commute for a person with a car, take like maybe 20, 30 minutes, becomes an hour excursion both ways that you have to plan for. And, you know, before you get to work, you have to plan like maybe an hour ahead to get ready and then to catch the bus. And these are all issues that certainly need to be tackled when we talk about environmental justice, not just to cut down on the amount of single occupancy vehicles that are on the road, but to also give people an opportunity and the means, the resources to be able to get to a standard of life that they want, that they choose.
Okay, any other panelists for direct comment on that question?
I just wanted to read out Liz's comment from the chat. She says, well said, everyone. Thank you for supporting with data and expertise our experiences and pain. And that's true. That combination of both the anecdote and the data behind it, one of the most powerful combinations to really get through.
Absolutely. Okay, so I will move towards our next question, which is how intersectional is environmental justice? We've been talking about a lot of different topics, and so I wanted to give you guys a chance to really talk about any other connections that the environmental justice movement has.
Gio, go for it, because you know it better than all of us, but we all have our expertise, but you encapsulate it so well. So Gio, go with it.
Thank you, Luz. I think, you know, this question really gets to my response to the previous question of identities. When we think about environment, it's literally everything around us, every single detail, from the pavement to the grass to everything. It's not just the trees, it's not just the flowers, it's not the mainstream environment that we've been societally taught. And so intersection is intrinsically within environment, period, let alone environmental justice. You cannot separate the two. It has to do with employment, it has to do with housing, it has to do with transportation, education, food, water, energy, health, both physical and mental, like everything that would allow us to live a healthy, prosperous, joyful, dignifiable life is connected to our environment. And so when we hear even the phrase like, oh, being a product of our environment, that is really, really accurate, because what you have around you will be a good deciding factor as to like where you are and where you're able to go. Even for myself, I'm not from Buffalo, I'm from the South Bronx. And I've been in Buffalo for almost 10 years. From a really young age, before I was even a teenager, I knew that my parents, my mom and her family that had immigrated to the United States in the late 80s had come to the Bronx and had all stayed in the same area, like literally the same area. And before I was even a teenager, I knew that I had to pay that forward because they've made so many sacrifices. But I also knew that unfortunately the Bronx was not the place allowing and empowering me to do that, to actually prosper in a way to bring that back. So those sacrifices could be well met and well deserved in that way, in the way that I saw my family and so many families around me do, right? And so our environment is literally all around us. There's no way of separating. That's just been a product of mainstream society to try to divide us further into thinking that there are silos. And it also then gets to resources, how we pit against each other for resources, to see them as their own sectors, as opposed to this compounding thing that really depicts our quality of life.
Thank you, Gio. And I know that for this next question, we've kind of talked about it a little, we've danced around it a little bit, but just to put a specific definition to it, how do you define environmental racism?
To give one particular example, the construction of the 33, how it basically like bisects that area of the east side with just this parkway highway, just, you know, what is it, 6 total lanes of just cars zooming back and forth. That, you know, that was a very vibrant community. And for the sake of moving vehicles, moving people who had their own cars from one end of the city to the other, from their home over in the suburbs to work downtown, just totally change that landscape to fit them and their needs, while not at all giving any kind of care to what the after effects would be for the people who live in that neighborhood. The noise pollution, the air pollution, the fact that, you know, that their entire like neighborhood is just cut in half just so people can drive through. So that's for me, that's a very vivid example of environmental racism.
Thank you. And I'm going to pass it over to Angel if it's okay with me volunteering him to answer. But I just think you have some very good insight into just redlining and some of the things that go on in Buffalo. So I'm going to pass it to you, Angel.
Well, thank you. Some of the oldest homes in Buffalo are in the like Lower West Side, Upper West Side. All the, you know, the areas that are a lot closer to downtown have a lot of the oldest homes. And when we look at our history of like redlining and so on and so forth, you know, people who were given the resources after like World War II, you know, with the GI Bill, they built new housing or and refurbished housing and built stuff farther away from those areas. And so there's a lot of houses that are, you know, 1940s, 1950s, you know, era, farther away from exactly where the water is and where the West Side and downtown area is. And those houses were built with, you know, insulation and other things like that weren't available when a lot of the houses were built before then, like in the early 1900s, both on the Lower West Side. And then even in the Broadway Fillmore area, I believe my house was built in 1909 or 1919, one of the two, and doesn't have very much insulation and things like that. And so when you talk about how the environmental racism takes place, is the fact that like with new homes and proper insulation and all these things, like their heating bills and cooling bills in those areas with those new homes, even to this day, are going to be a lot lower than something like mine. Mine are going to be a lot higher because of the fact that I have not properly insulated walls and basically drywall and plywood hold, you know, pretty much on my house. And so then you talk about that domino effect into energy consumption, like how much energy do I have to use in order to cool and heat my home? You know what I mean? Like it's not, and so when you talk about that, just one house's impact multiplied over thousands of homes in one area, you see a significant increase on the strain on the grid and the strain on how much energy we have to produce in order to effectively live our lives, which then leads into, you know, since we're still running on fossil fuels, we have to burn more fossil fuels in order to meet that demand. And so it all continuously like compounds in different ways, and somebody has to the bus has to stop somewhere, and someone has to like fit the bill for whatever the problem is and whatever the sacrifice is. And a lot of times it ends up being people of color in areas that are under-resourced and things like that on purpose. And so another thing is we see like the lead paint issue, and that Buffalo still has some of the highest like lead results in the country. Like we have children with higher lead in their blood than like Flint, Michigan does. And like, that's absolutely absurd to even like be able to say, considering what Flint's water crisis has been. Like we shouldn't be anywhere near that, but we are, and in some cases even higher. And we look at a lot of the old houses that were built in the 1910s and 20s and things like that. Like a lot of those still have lead paint that hasn't been addressed to this day, even though lead paint has been outlawed for decades, that you can't use lead paint anymore. But because it's in these poor areas, and because the people who own these homes don't have the, because people who live in these homes aren't the owners and aren't the ones with the resources, they can't remove that lead paint. They don't have the money to put into a home that they don't actually own. Like no renter has the resources to put into a house that doesn't, and up the equity of that house that they don't actually own themselves. And so a lot of times they get stuck living with lead paint while the owners live in, Cheektowaga, West Seneca, things like that, or New York City, for instance. They live in New York City, and they're not dealing with the lead issue. And so we see, like, again, constantly, like somebody always has to fit the bill for a bad decision. And, it just continuously gets passed down the line until it reaches until it reaches people of color. And then it's like, all right, this is a good place to leave the sacrifice and let them deal with it. And it's been that way for, the beginning of this country. And that's really the problem we're facing now, is that it's hundreds of years of racism that we're starting to uncover and deal with.
All right, so in the comment section, we have Eric that said, absolutely. My home was also built incredibly inefficient when we bought it in 2006, $3,000+ heating bills for the first 3 winters while on the budget plan. Oh, and split incentive. Landlords don't want to put the money into properties they're renting, but the burden of the inefficiencies affect the renter. Gio, you came off mute. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just really quickly to defining environmental racism. I know I've been saying this a lot, but it really gets to, again, the distribution of resources. And so I see environmental racism as the inequitable distribution of resources that is passed through policies, practices, protocols, enforcement of law, and that then become the new legal system. And we've seen this over and over again. And you have to think about, with those distribution of resources, what is the cause and effect? And that's a lot of what I hear Eric and Angel and Luz share their own experiences, as well as the specific examples that they're talking about in Buffalo, how that has been deemed okay, eminent domain, right? Taking over a plot of land and doing whatever the government may please for the public benefit of the greater good. What is the effect of that? It's decimating communities that were formerly affluent communities that were doing good, creating cancer clusters, creating upper respiratory damages that, again, will lower their life quality and life expectancy. And that is through many different forms, again, practices, policies, protocols that then become law and we have to abide by.
Really quickly, I just wanted to say that what Gio's saying is so true, and it has been intentional. The redlining was intentional. The fact that, we look at gentrification, that we look at the rezoning of districts so that we are forced to stay because we cannot afford to move elsewhere, is intentional. And until we can change our politicians and the way in which they think and how they do things, because if it's not hitting home, if they're not feeling the pain, it doesn't relate to them, then they're not worried about it, and we continue to suffer. So I'm off the soapbox now.
Now, Lucy, feel free to get on the soapbox. The soapbox is why we are here tonight. So moving on to the next question, I really want to, help my institution that I'm currently within. So what roles can organizations like mine, the Buffalo Museum of Science, take on to help further this work?
Okay, real quick. Because it is a museum, I tend to look at, and it's something that Gio opened my whole world to, and a lot of you young people did. But the whole idea of not just science, but of science in relationship to art. And because a lot of people don't speak a similar language, to be able to express it in ways that we can see it and understand it. A lot of this new technology, it's hard to explain. So to be able to use all these different genres of fields to explain to people without using words, be it music, art, whatever it takes, that to me is something that museums can do. So that's it.
Any other direct responses to that question? Okay, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead, Gio.
I'll go after both of you.
Eric, go ahead.
No. You first. Angel.
Yeah. All right. We'll pass it to Angel
All right.
first because you've said the least. Then we'll pass it to Eric and then Gio.
It's alphabetical order.
There you go. All right. So I think even talk about the science of things. I think even exhibits that kind of can display what is the difference in air quality from having trees and plants. And I think that's and then likening that again to what I mentioned earlier about Bidwell versus Broadway. And so if there's a way you could put something up that shows this is what the air quality is like when you have this many plants or trees in this area. Now you tell people hey, look at this, and now factor that into the Bidwell versus Broadway area. If this is showing you right here the scientific proof that air quality is better with more greenery, then point them to the consideration what do you think someone walking down Bidwell is breathing versus what do you think someone walking down Broadway is breathing? Especially with people on Broadway needing to take the bus and waiting at the bus stop. How many cars do you think pass by and one individual waiting on Broadway? How much fumes from a car exhaust are going into the air right there in front of them while they wait for the bus? And there's no trees, so there's nothing to help with that air quality. And I just that real example of saying this is the science and this is how it applies to the areas we live in. I think it's just one thing that would drastically change how people view things like Bidwell and Broadway. For a lot of people, not seeing trees on Broadway, that's not their first instinct. Is not, oh, there's not really a tree around. No one really consciously thinks of that until they're forced to realize why that's important. If they don't know why not having trees down Broadway is important, they're not even going to think of it. Also for heating reasons, it's a lot hotter waiting for the bus on Broadway. The pavement is a lot warmer. The streets are a lot warmer. All those things that affect just your living experience, the way it feels to walk to the corner store, or the way it feels to walk to wait for the bus is a lot hotter and more uncomfortable just because of the lack of trees. And so I think that's how you do it, is ways that the science can tie back into where we live, and showing those examples would be huge just for people's understanding. And once people, once you show them the negative of that, of Broadway not having the trees versus Bidwell, and then people could start putting kind of their own assessments together, and then asking questions is how they'll get to the history example. Why does Bidwell have all these trees and why does Broadway not? You know what I mean? They'll ask themselves that questions, and that curiosity will lead them into their their own history lessons and readings and things like that. So I think it's just kind of getting that spark going to make people want to know the answers to those questions.
Absolutely. To continue with what he was saying, I feel that institutions and organizations like the Buffalo Museum of Science, they already act as a hub for learning, and bringing that learning and making it something like that Angel was saying, that's more relatable, directly relatable to the people in the area, the people in the city. And like you were saying, having those experiments. I think another way that organizations in general can be very helpful, and I'm going to bring a live example again. 7 hours ago, Jillian Hainsworth posted that she had a partnership with KeyBank to develop libraries in the neighborhood, and she's going to use these libraries to really push forward local authors. And not only is that part of it, but the libraries are being built by local youth. So these are like just this one act of KeyBank developing this partnership with her, filling out the rest of her GoFundMe, is not only given her project life, it's given folks like the youth that are building libraries a chance to actually develop skills and camaraderie, and then also like give back to their community and invest into their community. And then once the libraries are built and out for the public to use, then you have local artists that can get their books into the library, and then really puts their feelings, their expressions, their perspective back out into the community. So I think there's so many different ways that organizations like the Buffalo Museum of Science can get involved. And it really just starts with moments like this, like having conversations with people in the area and getting, their feedback, what they think they need. Because when it comes down to it, we know what we need in our areas. We know how to solve the problem. It's a matter of getting us and our anecdotes as well as expertise to the table.
Yeah, I feel all of that. Excuse me. And my response is mirroring Angel's and Eric's responses. I think a lot about the Buffalo Museum's commitment to decolonization of data and science, right? Data and science has always been the study and telling of people's and species stories, trying to understand, right? That's the underlying factor of why and where and how and all of these how all of these origin questions and stories. And so our stories have always been at the forefront of that. So therefore, it is time for organizations such as the Buffalo Museum to really engage in equitable distribution of resources. If you haven't noticed the theme in my responses throughout the night, I know that the museum gets national, state, county, and city grants and different funding opportunities, right? So how can you actually look into investing that into the most frontline communities to allow those same communities to tell their own story, as Eric was just saying, and to lead the movement on environmental justice and radicalizing science so that it is more focused on people and planet over profits and over a white-driven agenda and story, which the reality is that science has been focused on. That has been the origin story of science for a long time, or even how it's been spewed to be that way. And so I echo and I plus the responses that Angel and Eric have said, but distribution of resources and allowing folks to tell their own stories and radicalizing what that looks like so that it doesn't have to be this quite often boring platform that people don't feel empowered to learn in and through. Because they don't see themselves in these platforms.
Okay, and then we do have a question in the chat. Pardon me if I don't pronounce your name correctly, Suit. I am new to Buffalo and I can see the disparities and effects within the communities I work with. How can individuals get involved with environmental justice? And I will open that up to the different forms of justice that you work with, because our final question was, how can the community get involved with your work? So just tying those two questions together, why don't we start with Luz if you're available, and then we'll go Eric, Gio, Angel.
Okay, I was gonna say that there's so many different agencies that are working with regard to this kind of issue. Knowing the type of work that New York Renews under Gio was doing, and a lot of other wonderful people that I'm looking at that they were doing. I think that looking it up, Googling it, getting in touch with people like Gio, Kelly, who have so many resources and so much information, I think going to them can point you in the right direction. Thank you.
There are so many different organizations that are at work and at play in Buffalo, and especially with regard to environmental justice and housing justice, and really all of the forms of justice. I think the biggest thing that an individual can do is really just open yourself up to working with any and all of them until you find that particular issue that speaks directly to you, or that really calls you into the work. And then, like Gio had mentioned before, recognizing the different identities at play within yourself, both the identities of oppression and privilege, and figuring out how you can balance those, especially when you're doing the work, so that you're not making it about you in an egotistical sense, but making it about how you can be of service to the greater good, the greater community. I particularly started working with Push Buffalo, and that has led me to amazing people like Gio, like Angel, like Christian Para. And really, like, it came down to, I like to move now more where those people are going, where the people that I've made connections with are going, rather than any one particular organization. Because again, at the end of the day, when you are building this you're building basically community. You're not just like building new community, but like rebuilding community as well. And so it makes more sense to don't stick with like a brand. Don't get caught up in like brand loyalty. Get caught up in people loyalty. Get caught up in being there for the people that you want to see succeed, whose lives you want to help better.
Yes, to all of that. And I think to your last point, Eric, was, not sticking to branding and loyalty to a set organization, but really using organizations as a conduit and vessel to creating change, right? That's really at the heart of what organizations are set to do, or what they should be doing. And we know the reality is that a lot are not doing their due diligence and fulfilling out their purpose, but that doesn't mean that we as concerned people and individuals and residents can't be doing that while building community and working on our own liberation and healing, and that of future generations to come. Obviously, you all heard Kelly, so shameless plug. I'm leaving New York Renews, which is a statewide coalition of almost 300 groups statewide, and now serving as lead organizer for Working Families Party. And so I was doing a lot of legislative campaigning work for the last couple of years, and that was really powerful. And we passed nation's most ambitious climate legislation, whole country right here in New York State, and Buffalo threw down immensely. But what we're seeing now is that we can't get as progressive legislation passed because we don't have the legislative champions. And so working with the Working Families Party now, which is a C4 organization, to actually put forth candidates that know what they need where they live, are willing to champion these issues and topics and put them in forms of policies to pass them on a state, local, county levels to really implement the change. Because again, redistribution of resources is really critical. And when we think about environmental racism and environmental classism and that distribution, that then gets passed forward through our policies that then become our practices with each other. And so that becomes a really big thing. And then specifically, you were alluding to this, Eric, of just how can, with the question of how can individuals get involved, right? I think it really depends on
Geo froze out there a little bit. So we'll see if she has a connection that he needs to bring back in. I just want to say at this point, like thinking about using the organization as a vessel, that makes a lot of sense to me. And my metaphor brain thinks about justice organizations like hermit crab shells. Like you work with the shell that you got until you outgrow it. And when that shell is not serving you anymore, move on, find a better fit. Because things are constantly changing, situations are changing, and the fit that's good for today might not be the fit that's good for tomorrow, but you can always move on, use that shell as a vehicle to protect you for that moment. And then when it's not of service anymore, you shift out and find the next one. And now we'll pass it back to Gio. Glad that you came back on.
Sorry, I got disconnected. The bad universe was listening to me trying to dismantle it and was like, no, not on a Wednesday night. Yeah, but I was just wrapping up with saying that, you know, people's individual stories is a really important aspect of getting involved and knowing what organization will serve your needs and will empower you and challenge you in ways for growth and liberation and healing, and will connect you to those people that no matter where they go, you will go, because there is a trust and a bond that is created there. That is, when we say your liberation is tied to my liberation, that is real. That's not just a saying, right? And so that's what I heard from Eric.
Yep, and I just want to piggyback off like what they said, and I really want to reinforce the idea of like organizations are like vessels and really just like modes of transportation for the work you want to do. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, having a brand, having an organization, having like a reputation will get you people's respect, or at least the conversation from them, you know, in ways that like we wish that wasn't the case, and we wish that we didn't, you know what I mean? Like the world we want to see and the world we want to work towards is one that doesn't have to be the case, and one where you as a regular member of the community who is doing their own part can have the conversations and be respected. And so I think until we get to the world we want to see, and I think while we work towards that vision, it's, you know, finding organizations that have resources, that have relationships with legislators or with other experts and things like that, and putting, you know, your effort and time in a place that makes you feel respected, that makes you feel valued and appreciated. Shameless plug, I just took over as lead organizer of Citizens Action of New York's Buffalo chapter. And Gio coincidentally is currently the chair of our climate committee as well. So like, and all the work that she does is immensely incredible. And I just think like that's just one organization, and Push was is an organization plenty of people have been to and worked with, and there's, you know, tons all over the place. And it's again just finding, like others have said, like where are the people at the organization, the type of people you want to be around. You know, like if the people at the org don't make you feel respected and valued, someone else will. Someone else will value your time, your energy, your donations, whatever you do to further the cause. Like someone somewhere personally will respect that and appreciate it, not for the sake that you did the work, but because they know that it's not easy for someone to find the time, the energy, the money to do those kinds of things. And that it's only through collectively building community with each other that we can, you know, actually address the issues and actually move forward and build community. And even this panel is the result of building community through working or volunteering at organizations. You know, like us as panelists are here because we all met working or volunteering or whatever the case may be at Push Buffalo. And, you know, we all put our effort and time and things like that with other volunteers, and built a community now that we're all here talking to you and doing this panel together, and also holding relationships outside of here. And so it's really about like no system and no issue is addressed individually, and like building that community together is really like the first step in doing all those things, and just being able to like trust one another to do, you know, whatever we say we're going to, and supporting each other when we need it.
Thank you to each and every one of you for being here and for being vulnerable and for being passionate about the work that you do. It's just, this was so valuable, I think, to quite a few people. So let me know, panelists, if there's anything you would like to drop before we start some questions. So attendees, start loading some questions into the chat. And if there are no questions, I will just read some of these uplifting comments that were put in the chat that I didn't have a chance to read yet. So feel free, panelists, to plug anything. And if you don't have anything, I'll jump into the comment.
I'm going to drop my email because anybody who, even beyond how can you be involved with dealing with environmental justice and the issues, but like you're here on a Wednesday night when there's a lot of other things you could be doing because you're interested in environmental justice. And just off of that like interest alone, I'm going to drop my email, and I would love to have conversations with people because there's a lot of things you could be doing on a Wednesday night besides being on Zoom, but you choose to be here. And that I think is really powerful and an example of like how much you care about yourself, the people around you, the environment in the area around you. And I just totally would love to get to know people. So I'm going to drop my work email, and anyone can reach me there.
Thank you so much for that. Like, really, this is exactly what we're looking for, conversations and connecting, and that's exactly right. You could have been anywhere on a Wednesday night and you're here, and that's a great step, and keep doing things like that. Keep connecting with people.
All right. We also had Gio, who dropped her information in the chat. So if anybody wants to reach out to any of the panelists, feel free to contact Gabrielle or I, and we will get you in touch with the panelists. I'm sure that when we post these videos, we also have a way to drop some of this information in there as well. We don't have any questions in our chat, but Joe was writing some really uplifting things, talking about how all of the stakeholders need to view themselves as being a part of rather than historically being apart from. This requires knowledge. This can be a focus of educational community as being a part of an entire community. Emily said, thank you everyone for sharing your perspectives, expertise, stories, and power tonight. Grateful for each of you. Let's see. Oh, and then we have emails from our panelists. So are there any questions before we go that any of you have for each other, from attendees to panelists or panelists to panelists?
I think we definitely need a second part, only because I really do believe that there are a lot more people that probably could not make it today, because there's always so many things going on. So I really do believe, and I recommend that, you know, we do another one at some point. Whether I'm involved or not, it doesn't matter, just so more people can understand what it all means. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. And I think, yeah, we can definitely look at revisiting this again. I'm thinking about sometime in the spring, maybe around National Engineers Week, as we're talking about building better and building community. I think that there could be a good fit there. We've got a hand up from Emily Diet. Emily, if you want to come off mute and ask your question.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Hi. Nice to hear you all. Yeah, no, I just was thinking the same thing as Luce. I think this was really awesome. And I feel like, you know, as the Museum of Science and like thinking about the way science and justice and environment and all of that intersectional work that we've all been doing is so connected, and like the museum could be really that like convener for folks, because I think there is so much work being done, and like sometimes it's hard to get everyone together, but like I feel like the museum could serve as that in some way, because this is awesome and I want more. And yeah, you guys are all awesome. That's all.
Thank you, Emily. And then Joe, really quick, if you wanted to ask your question. You are on mute. You have to come off mute to ask.
Okay. Over the years, there's been many historic pieces of federal legislation for clean air and clean water. And then these pieces of legislation are, a number of things happening, they are amended in subsequent years. Oftentimes the amendment will exclude Indian reservations from their requirements, or oftentimes they'll shift responsibility from the federal government to a state or some other subordinate jurisdiction. And oftentimes, even though laws are on the books for things like clean air and clean water, enforcement is minimal. Oftentimes enforcement overlooks a lot of the major players. We have some legislation on the books dealing with all people, but they're enforced in such a way as to not consider, quote unquote, those people. And in the past, I've heard that phrase, those people. The education component requires a continuing dialogue of what does this mean, and what can we do, and how does everything affect everything else? That's my soapbox.
We love it, Joe. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to use this as a shameless plug for asking for feedback on our presentations. It's really important that we get those data points to support what we hear anecdotally. So there's just a 2-minute survey. If you want to open up that link, that would be a huge help to us. We are officially at 7 o'clock, and so this brings us to the end of our program. We really appreciate everyone joining us here today. Thank you to each and every one of our speakers for coming with your knowledge and your experience. Really, this has been such an excellent program. I think that we will kind of look forward into the next several months and look at doing a revisiting of this topic or a variant of it. Someone asked in the chat if these are available. Yes, they're available on our YouTube channel for Conversations in Science. There's a link in the chat, but you can also just find it through YouTube, Museum of Science Buffalo, in our playlists. And then if you'd like to visit us in person, we have a special exhibit opening on this Saturday, the 16th, by artist Alberto Rey. He's a Cuban American who has painted the collections of the museum. So again, talking about that bridge between art and science. He's selected 15 items that are very, very small in our museum's research collection, and he's painted them on monumental scale paintings, oil paintings. And I think this really speaks to Luz's point about art expressing things that are not shared through a spoken language. So I encourage everyone to come see Lost Beauty, opens on October 16th. And then know that the Buffalo Museum of Science is open Wednesday through Sunday from 10 to 4, and that the trails at Tiff Nature Preserve, if you're looking for respite in the city of Buffalo, Tiff is on a bus line and is free and open to the public from sunrise to sunset every day of the week. So thank you very much for being here. We're just past the hour. We just really appreciate all of your time and your talent that you brought to this conversation. And this is just a beginning, not the beginning, but a beginning. And so thank you so much to Kelly for organizing. Thank you to Angel, to Luz, bye Gio, she's a busy woman, she's got things to do. Eric, appreciate your time. And thank you to all of our attendees for your comments. This has been really tremendous. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Mr. Joe, for remembering our Indigenous brothers and sisters. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And Eric says, if anyone wants to check out the Westside Community Energy Roadmap, email me, which we will. Kelly, note to get that map real quick. Because we've been doing a bunch of stuff in the West Side as well. I'm just going to stop recording.